Joining me is Elizabeth Holtzman. She's a former U.S. Congresswoman who served on the House Judiciary Committee and voted to impeach Richard Nixon. She is currently running for the House seat in New York's 10th Congressional District, and she's the author of The Case for Impeaching Trump. In addition, we have Michael Conway. He's the adjunct lecturer at Northwestern University and served as counsel for the U.S. House Judiciary Committee in the impeachment inquiry of President Nixon. Thank you both for joining us. Michael, I want to pick up on that point about truth not being up for debate during the Watergate investigation. You've actually written about this. You argue that folks are often misremembering the Watergate era. Can you expand on that? How so?
Of course, Sam. So initially, the Republicans objected to the investigation, calling it, Gerald Ford, then a congressman, called it a witch hunt. The House Republicans were pretty much at the outset, but before the tapes were released, saying that this was completely a political event. It changed, of course, when the tapes became known, and certainly when the tapes were played. But also, we have to remember that there were Democrats serving with the Congresswoman, Representative Mann from South Carolina. His district had voted 80% for Richard Nixon in November of 1972. So even the Democrats were not necessarily in support of an impeachment inquiry of the president. But one thing I will mention is when the House voted to authorize the impeachment inquiry, 410 members voted in favor of starting the inquiry. Not necessarily impeaching the president, but starting the inquiry. You would never get that level of bipartisanship today.
That's funny. That's my question for you, Elizabeth. 7 House Republicans from the House Judiciary Committee at the time voted to impeach Richard Nixon for abuse of power. This go around, only 2 House Republicans are willing to associate themselves with the January 6th committee, one of whom is retiring, the other one who is likely to be defeated in her primary. How do you explain the differences here? Is it just different times, or is it something bigger?
Well, it's hard to understand what happened in Watergate in terms of the House Judiciary Committee is that, excuse me, the Republicans were willing to follow the facts. They didn't necessarily want to agree with Democrats. They were following the facts. Initially, they thought, as Michael said, that, there was nothing there. There was no there. But the fact is what they followed. Now, in fact, the rest of the Republicans on the committee did not join in the impeachment vote. They kept saying, well, the facts don't show that Nixon was involved. But they were wrong. And ultimately, when the smoking gun tape came out, all the Republicans joined. So it became not just bipartisan, it became unanimous. Nixon had to resign. Now what we see is that there's an alternative reality. It's not that the Republicans are following the facts. They make up their own facts. And there's no way that our democracy can function if people make up their facts. And that's the danger we confront today. And by the way, the same thing happened in the Senate. The Senate had its own hearings before the House Judiciary Committee had hearings. The top Republican, Howard Baker, conservative Republican, was a complete ally of Richard Nixon. He came up with the questions. What does the president know? And when did he know it? He thought the answers were going to show the president knew nothing. Well, when the answers became the president knows something, he followed the facts and not the president.
Don't ask a question you don't know the answer to, right? Michael, picking up on that point, this is the real contrast in my view. The public didn't know about Nixon's involvement in the Watergate break-in until very late in the scandal, whereas right now we knew about Trump's involvement almost in real time. The recording of his call, for instance, with Georgia Secretary of State Raffensperger came out pretty quickly after it took place. What do you think is the difference here and how that impacts public opinion? Is it just that the public is conditioned to this being Trump? We know about this stuff. We kind of factor it into the equation. Whereas with Nixon, it was a huge bombshell that completely moved public opinion when it became public?
Well, I think the existence of social media is a huge difference. Back in 1974, when our committee was doing its work, You saw the news on the major networks. You saw the news on NBC. You couldn't go to your partisan corner and get a different version of the facts, alternative facts, as the Congresswoman said. I think another key difference is the personality and demeanor of President Nixon versus President Trump. You know, Nixon was in a very close election in 1960. There were advisors then who urged him to challenge the election. And as a lawyer, he concluded, no, it would be too disruptive of the country. And so he didn't challenge Jack Kennedy's election despite allegations of voter fraud. And when the Supreme Court ordered Nixon to turn over the tapes, he obeyed. I think if the Supreme Court today ordered President Trump to turn over something, I think it's more likely than not that he'd be defiant. So part of it, I believe, is just the personality. There wasn't really the cult of Richard Nixon as there is the cult of Donald Trump.
Fair enough. Elizabeth, let's set the stage. 1972, you're the youngest woman ever elected to Congress. You're on the House Judiciary Committee. I'm kind of curious, in real time, do you recognize the historic endeavor that you are now part of? And how does the mood change among members of the House, specifically on the committee, as you get into this, as you are involved in this impeachment process? Do the stakes feel heightened? Do you guys talk in heightened terms? How does the mood shift among sitting members when you're involved?
Well, when I was elected in November 1972, the cover-up, the Watergate cover-up was so successful that I didn't even want to be on the House Judiciary Committee. And they put me, the leadership of the House, put me on the House Judiciary Committee against my will. They never would have done that if anybody had any clue that the Judiciary Committee would be sitting in the middle of one of the most historical moments of the 20th century in American history. So that's what my consciousness was. It was only after Judge Sirica imposed tough sentences, and the burglar said, one of the burglars broke down and said, you know, there are higher ups involved, that this Watergate cover-up started breaking apart. I think for me, what we were presented with as members of the Judiciary Committee was fact after fact after fact. We had these big black books, notebooks. They were secret material. We had to put them in our safes in our offices. But the fact of the matter is that every single day we would sit down, the head of the Judiciary Committee staff would read us a statement of fact. By the time that finished, I felt as though I were in a swamp, just going down, down, down in quicksand, that there was no bottom to the level of criminality of Richard Nixon. And it made me really upset and angry because even though I disagreed with his policies, I did not want to see my president engage in this conduct. And so by the time the vote came, it was a very sober moment because I knew that I thought there was overwhelming evidence, but I didn't want to be in the position of having to sit in judgment of a president of the United States and finding that he had engaged not just in criminal conduct, but abusive conduct. And by the way, Watergate included much more than the break-in and the cover-up. It included illegal wiretaps. It included sicking the IRS on political enemies. It included all kinds of misuse of power with regard to Cambodia. And now we find out that President Nixon tried to and succeeded in stymieing the Paris peace talks, thereby prolonging the Vietnam War and the death of Americans and the Vietnamese for 4 more years. His abuses of power were huge. And the interesting thing is he was held accountable, not fully, but partially.
All right. Elizabeth Holtzman, Michael Conway. I could do this probably for another hour, but we don't have the luxury of doing it for another hour. But thank you both for joining us on Sunday afternoon. Really appreciate it.